Good morning, dear colleagues. The sitting is open. Before we start, I want to remind all members that they should insert their badge before taking the floor. As you begin your speech, please press the microphone button once only, wait for a couple of seconds, and then everything is going smooth. This morning, the agenda now calls for the election of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, so it's a historical day today for us. The list of candidates for Secretary General of the Council of Europe and biographical notices are to be found in document 15968. The candidates are Mr. Alain Berset from Switzerland, Mr. Didier Reinders from Belgium, Mr. Indrek Saar from Estonia. This is an alphabetical way that I'm announcing the names. The election will be held in the lobby of the Committee of Ministers. At 12:05 p.m., the ballot will be closed. As usual, counting will then take place under the supervision of 5 tellers appointed by the political groups. The 5 tellers are from the Socialist, Mrs. Heike Engelhardt; from the EPP, Mr. Joseph O'Reilly; from the European Conservatives, Mr. Oleksiy Goncharenko; from ALDE, Mr. Claude Kern; and from United European Left, Mr. Paul Gavan. I remind them that they should go to the lobby of the Committee of Ministers when the ballot closes. I expect to announce the results of the election here in the Assembly chamber before the end of this morning's sitting. If a second round is needed, this will take place this afternoon between 4 and 6 p.m. I now declare the ballot open. And we now come to the joint debate on 2 reports from the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. The first is titled Strengthening Democracy Through Participatory and Deliberative Processes, document 16001, presented by Mr. George Papandreou. The second is titled Strengthening a Young Perspective in the Work of the Parliamentary Assembly, document 15871, presented by Mr. Anastasios Hadjivasiliou. This will be followed by presentation of an opinion by Mrs. Yevgenia Kravchuk on behalf of the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media. This will be followed by a statement by Mrs. Marharyta Vorykhava, Vice Chair of the Advisory Council on Youth. In order to finish this item by 12 p.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 11:45 a.m. to allow time for the replies and the votes. I now call Mr. Papandreou, Rapporteur, to present the first floor. You have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate. George, you have the floor.
Esteemed colleagues, a few days ago I was in a lively discussion with a young woman. She posed, "Does my vote even matter?" I answered yes. If politics seems slow and complex, every vote does count. Democracy is a process, a change that takes time and effort. Yet her feelings need to be recognized by us all, as they represent many young voters, and I would add many parts of our society. Her questions challenge our understanding of the strains of disillusionment, such as what has happened, the global financial crisis which triggered downturns, breeding inequalities and undermining our welfare systems, eroding trust in our institutions. Our vast wealth and technological capacities, yet a bleak outlook for generations to come, for jobs to climate crisis, deep frustration and anger. The recent pandemic, which highlighted the rapid online spread of conspiracy theories, increasing public confusion, distrust in mainstream media and scientific process. The war against Ukraine intensified disinformation campaigns, external actors like Russia aiming at swaying public opinion, undermining democratic processes. While globalization has reduced poverty in some regions, it has splintered our society's cohesion, magnified disparities, and exacerbated political corruption, undermining the rule of law. It has also concentrated wealth and power, which distorts political influence and the integrity of our democratic institutions. These challenges, from multilateral crisis and geopolitical conflicts to concerns about artificial intelligence and environmental issues, have fostered a profound sense of vulnerability, injustice, and powerlessness among our citizens. And this poses a dilemma about the quality of our politics, of our democratic governance. In social media, it is the volume of traffic that is measured for you to become a successful influencer, not the destination of your travel. In our voting systems, we have developed elaborate techniques to influence our voters, but less so to develop an understanding of where we want to go. In our economies, we measure the volume of our GDP. As Robert F. Kennedy said before he was assassinated, this does not allow us to measure the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom or our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. Dear colleagues, we are challenged to rethink the quality of our democratic procedures. It's too easy, when fear and uncertainty reigns, to freeze up, to close up, to hide behind our national symbols or authoritarian saviors. This, in the end, is a sign of weakness, of lack of confidence in our societies and in our peoples. Instead, in people we need to trust, not every 4 years, but every day. Free our political imagination and tap into the collective knowledge and capacity our societies have. Create the spaces of democratic dialogue, debate, and mutually attained goals and solutions. This report is not a prescription. It's a challenge to imagine a more engaged, a more active society and citizenship, expanding our political ecosystem with innovative, inclusive methods where citizens are at the heart of decision-making. Participatory and deliberative democracy are not simply techniques to be applied in mechanistic ways. They're a way of thinking, an attitude, an expanding democratic culture which seeks practical pathways that can revitalize our institutions, restore faith in democratic process, allowing citizens to be agents of their future. To truly harness the wisdom of our citizens, we must create spaces where innovative ideas can flourish, where dialogue is not just encouraged, but structured in a way that bridges the gap between scientific expertise and public understanding. Learning from Tartu, Estonia, a pioneer of implementing participatory budgeting, or Porto Alegre in Brazil, or Ireland when it deliberated on abortion, or France on climate, we can imagine a new branch of government, a deliberative branch, harnessing the wisdom of our citizens, dedicated to ongoing and structured dialogue between experts and citizens. As mandated in the Reykjavik conclusions, we propose a bold reimagining of our democratic processes. Adopt participatory and deliberative democracy processes at all levels. Allocate the necessary financial, technical, and human resources. Harness digital tools such as artificial intelligence responsibly for the common good, creating democratic spaces for citizens' participation. And of course, so crucial, we need to emphasize education. Participation, democratic participation, and education go hand in hand. And our schools are more for creating skills for some jobs that may not exist, and much less for creating citizens that have to be actively involved in decision-making and understanding the challenges we have ahead of us. Let us therefore commit to these transformative steps, building flourishing societies, fostering an environment where democratic institutions are not only respected, but are resilient and responsive to the unprecedented challenges on the one hand, and also the needs that the society, our youth, our women, our minorities, our citizens all around Europe and all over the world we want to serve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Papandreou. I now call Mr. Tassos Hadjivasiliou, Rapporteur, to present the second report. Dear Tassos, you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank Mr. Papandreou for his invaluable contribution. You know that young people represent the future, and their active participation and involvement in political life is the minimum precondition for building stable societies and strong democracies in our today's era. Looking at the multidimensional and the related challenges that lie ahead of us, dear colleagues, this is becoming more and more evident. Look at the dramatic consequences of climate change or the financial geopolitical instability at global level, and how this reality widens inequalities, affects human rights, and puts peace at risk. And look, dear colleagues, at the increasing presence of artificial intelligence in our societies, in our everyday life. So all these challenges require innovative thinking, and it is crystal clear that young people must be a part not only of the political conversation, but also of the decision-making process. It's not enough to just hear what young people have to say, but it is necessary and really important to actively include them at the table where policies are designed and decisions are being made. Dear colleagues, unfortunately, young Europeans are underrepresented in local councils and national parliaments. They do not engage enough with traditional politics due to legislative and other barriers, or even due to prejudices. So, this reinforces their disenchantment with political life, undermines the representativeness of elected institutions, and of course it raises questions about generational justice. Our democracies, dear colleagues, are showing worrying signs of backsliding. The growing distrust among citizens towards public institutions, fueled by populism, extremism, and xenophobic discourse, is having an impact on the quality and sustainability of our democracy. However, dear colleagues, youth represents a beam of hope for reverting this reality. The idealism and enthusiasm that characterize young people should be channeled by all means to reignite the vivid flame of our European democracies. There cannot be a real democracy without youth participation today. All countries in Europe and beyond should design mechanisms to bring young people in the political debate so that they can express their dreams, their views and concerns. Therefore, dear colleagues, all voices should be heard without any discrimination. The Council of Europe, our organization, is a pioneer in youth participation, and our Assembly has always played its part by encouraging the active participation of young people in civil life. Since 1970, it has called for the setting up of the European Youth Foundation, and in 1972, dear colleagues, we established the European Youth Centre and the co-management system of the Joint Council on Youth. We gave a strong voice to both representatives of young Europeans and representatives of public authorities responsible for youth issues. Since 2014, the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities has implemented a scheme where national delegations include youth delegates. Yet, dear colleagues, our Council has an important role to play. The heads of state and government confirmed in Reykjavik the need to integrate the youth perspective in its deliberations. So while the Parliamentary Assembly explores the youth dimension through the Subcommittee on Youth and the Society of the Future of the Committee on Culture, it does not have a formal mechanism which allows a meaningful participation of youth in our work. Dear colleagues, based on this premise, I have prepared the draft resolution that we today discuss. We come to the end of a process started with the motion tabled by the Committee on Culture, which also contributed with the preparation of a valuable opinion through the work of our colleague Ms. Kravchuk, who I warmly congratulate for her job. We had various and important exchanges of views with the Advisory Council on Youth, and I kindly welcome the Vice Chair, Ms. Vorykhava, who will take the floor later, and thank you for being today here with us. Dear colleagues, in April 2023, in her report on the 4th summit, our esteemed colleague Ms. O'Loughlin emphasized on the need for the Council to integrate the youth perspective in its deliberations. This recommendation was endorsed by the heads of state and government, and the demands of European leaders are answered in this very draft resolution, dear colleagues. So, I propose to set up a mechanism which allows youth representatives to engage in a structured and well-planned manner with the Assembly members. Young people could define priorities, raise concerns, and above all, propose solutions. So this mechanism I propose will involve appointing youth rapporteurs in each committee of the Parliamentary Assembly with responsibility to liaise with youth representatives. One strategic meeting per year between the Bureau of the Parliamentary Assembly and the Bureau of the Joint Council on Youth, with the participation of the youth rapporteurs from each committee. One meeting per year between youth rapporteurs of the committees and representatives of youth organizations to discuss the Assembly's work and the substance of our reports. And last but not least, one annual debate in our Assembly devoted to the exchange of views with youth representatives. Dear colleagues, the draft resolution also invites the national delegations to the Parliamentary Assembly to increase the presence of young parliamentarians amongst their members and encourage their active role in our work. Moreover, it calls on its political groups to give a greater visibility to young members and to work with their national political parties in order to increase youth representation, especially those of young women. So, dear colleagues, we need to reinforce democracy in order to face today's problems and tomorrow's challenges. To achieve this goal, young people should be heard. They should be involved in the political debate and, of course, in the decision-making process. So this draft resolution provides a significant contribution to the overall commitment of the Council of Europe to strengthen the inclusion of youth in our mechanism and our work. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Tassos. I have to say that both Greeks, George and Tassos, were in time. Now, Evgenia Kravchuk, Rapporteur of the Opinion. You have 3 minutes.
Dear colleagues, dear President, our rapporteurs, I think it's a really historical day for our Assembly. Having finally these reports. They were postponed from the last session, and now they have a very prominent day, Tuesday, especially when we have the biggest number of members of the Assembly here for the vote for the Secretary General. So thank you for putting this in the agenda in such a prominent position. Of course, I would like to welcome the young people, young students, welcome them. They're listening to us. And I think this is the example how our Assembly is open. But indeed, our rapporteur gives other tools to be even more efficient, to be more structurized with these exchanges of, between the Assembly, between all of the committees. Because, of course, the subcommittee that I'm chairing on youth and society of the future cannot just follow all of the committees, all of the topics. So having the youth rapporteur in every committee is quite a great idea, and I think it will benefit to all of the topics. But I will have to a bit argue with our colleague and the rapporteur that the process is not over, because the Assembly has to change the rules and procedures. So another report will be created or written in the Rules and Procedures Committee, and this is very important that we do this follow-up quite quickly, because the young people who hear that will have this tool would like to use it. But coming to the opinion, indeed the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media fully supported the idea and this mechanism, and also we proposed the amendments that were all agreed with the Political Committee. Thank you for that. It's clarifying the function of the mechanism in practice, enhance the role of youth rapporteurs, in particular in the work of the committees, define the actions expected by national delegations and political groups, underline the special situation of young women in politics and of young parliamentarians in war zones and frozen conflicts regions. And I will stop a bit on this last point. Well, first of all, young women in politics. Look at this bench. What do you see? The only women, rather young. I was young when I was becoming a member of parliament, now a bit out of age, but still feel young. And of course, we have to give these instruments influence to young women because they face double standards. They face it as an age and as a gender when they get into the candidates list at the parties and then when they campaign. So encourage your political parties to have more young women and, of course, young people overall. And the last but not the least, coming from Ukraine, country that is at war, it's crucial to support young people in those countries. And I thank the Department on Youth in this engagement, and I feel that the cooperation will be fruitful for Ukraine as well. Thank you.
So, thank you, Evgenia. Let me give now the floor to another young woman who is with us today. This is Marharyta Vorykhava. Marharyta is Vorykhava or Vorykhava? Vorykhava, Vice Chair of the Advisory Council on Youth. Marharyta, you will make a statement for 5 minutes, and I want to just to point out that George Papandreou is being followed all his life with a Marharyta, either his mother or his granddaughter. Am I right, George? Okay, so Marharyta, you have the floor.
So much. Okay. Honorable President, dear members of the Assembly, and I'm really honored to be here, not only as a Vice Chair of the Advisory Council on Youth, but also as a young person. And I'm really concerned for the future of Europe, and being surrounded by all the conflict that we are facing in this crucial time, it is really a true honor and to be here. Young people are on the front lines of the crisis that we are facing in Europe. In Ukraine, they are defending their country against the invasion. They are defending Europe. In Belarus, young people are jailed for standing up for human rights. In Georgia, young people face persecution for protesting for freedom and a European future. And across Europe, young people are fighting for climate action, advocating for social justice, and defending their rights. And in spite of all this, we are driving change. Young people have showed incredible capacity to mobilize and advocate for change. From climate strikes to social justice movements, we've proven that we have a commitment and that we are effective in driving progress. Young people are growing up in the digital area as well, in the digital age. We have a unique understanding of the digital era and how to navigate it and how to use the innovations that are increasingly influencing our democracy. The Reykjavik Declaration, which underscores the importance of youth participation in democratic processes, is also a testament to our relevance and potential in defending democracy in Europe. We must go and move beyond the symbolic involvement of young people to real involvement in decision-making. And the motion for a resolution to establish a youth partner status within the Parliamentary Assembly is crucial to us. We view it not just as a symbol, but as a recognition of young people's vital contributions to democracy. And achieving this status will enable us to effectively participate in decision-making, making our democracies more inclusive and representative. And the report as well highlights the need to include our viewpoints in all aspects of the Assembly's work. We should be the leaders of today, tackling climate change, social justice, and digital transformation. However, to truly achieve this, we need more representation in decision-making places. And thus including us in policy development, debates, and general decision-making mechanisms ensures that the needs and aspirations of all citizens are better met. And the decisions made today will profoundly impact our futures. Thus, it is only fair that we have actually a say in shaping these decisions. And our involvement guarantees that decisions are made with a long-term vision that benefits future generations. So by embracing the contributions of young people, we can build a more inclusive, dynamic, and revitalized democracy capable of withstanding today's threats. That said, this is just the beginning here today. We need to shift our attitude and recognize that this is a long-term investment in our shared common future. And I do not say that young people will change the world, but I do say that we can if we have the means to. And if we want this new vision of the world, we need to recognize and arrive at it by striving for it together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Vorykhava. Dear colleagues, now we open the floor for the debate, and I call for the speakers on behalf of political groups. First, Mr. Nicole Hext from the European Conservatives.
Kann man
Really
mich
sorry,
hören?
Madam.
Ja.
Madam Hext.
Herr Präsident.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, youth cannot simply be a loss for democracy. I think that this is something which brings us all together, and I would like to thank our rapporteurs who have presented their report here. Not to lose youth also means that policies must be made for youth and to have generational equity. This is a word that has something to do with whether debts should be undertaken, for instance, at the cost of generations to come. Those who have not even begun working, for instance. To be generationally just, we also have to have young people have a migration policy that does not make them a minority in their own country with all the consequences that that has. There are many examples of why young people urgently need to participate and their fears about the future. In this report, there are many things that I think are presented from a false perspective. To my way of thinking, the point of departure here is that only people who belong to a specific group, only young people, can properly represent the interests of young people, and we consider this as false. A really important historical example of this, for instance, is that men gave women the right to vote and the right to work and the right to be present in political life. Men did that for women, and I think that men and women can also work for the whole society and make policy for them. It's also important that we here see that we have elected representatives who work for their whole people, for all the citizens in the EU and all of Europe. And this process should not be deviated from through a taking of influence by lobby groups, even youth lobby groups, but there are many others who suddenly want to have a right to be heard. And it is very clear, and I would say this to the young people here, that all parties are going to work hard to represent young people and to apply these ideas, even in the case that they're wrong. Please don't misunderstand me. Young people don't have the experience and the knowledge of the world to be able to make their beautiful ideas reality. I don't mean this badly in any way. This is simply the nature of the situation. I cannot agree with the whole report, only with parts of it. And we will therefore abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. I call now Sonia Hajarian from ALDE.
Honorable Chair, dear colleagues, dear reporters, first of all, I would like to congratulate you both on very good reports with very essential highlights. I do agree that we are facing a backsliding of democracy all over the Europe in member states, and it is indeed very worrying. And we need more inclusive ways to have more young people. We need to overcome low electoral turnouts in the member states. And once I was the youngest female MP in Armenia, and I do understand how important it is to create such an environment when young people can boost their full potential. I do agree with Ms. Kravchuk. She was saying that young, especially female politicians, are being criticized both for their age and for their gender. So it is very important to create a good environment. Another thing I would like to say, and it was very interesting in the report, that apparently 50% of a population is underrepresented in the parliament. It's merely 3%, which means that half of the world has just merely 3% influence on decision-making process. And this is really worrying. Another thing that was very important to highlight why young people do not participate in political processes. So I was speaking to young people asking. So first they were telling me was about the funds. They need more funds, they need the environment, and they need to fight against prejudice and stereotypes. As a group, we really support the idea of having a youth rapporteur and to have them, to give them opportunity to speak after the group speakers. Another thing I would like to highlight that we are very much interested and we support is the Amendment G that was adopted, which was calling actively to create national political parties, the processes and instruments to have more young people in the parties itself, because we believe that the gateway to the institutionalized politics is through the parties. So we support the idea, we support the idea of having youth rapporteur, and we need to work, all the member states need to work together to overcome the backsliding of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bertrand Sturck, on behalf of the European Union, United European Left. Bertrand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank you, reporters, for these fine reports. It's sobering to have to acknowledge on the 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe that European democracy is in crisis. But it is also vital to understand that this is the case. As inequality increases, leaving large section of our populations struggling with everyday existence, and the world lurches towards war and climate catastrophe, it's hardly surprising that people feel that politicians do not act in their interests, that our system of representative democracy is neither very representative nor very democratic. So this debate on democracy is necessary and welcome. I represent a political party in an elected parliament, but we work within a perspective that sees political work as part of the continuum with community activism and local organization. Our ideal would be to see decisions made as locally as possible, and we try to break down the distinction between politics and everyday life. Politics shouldn't be something alien and probably hostile. A vote every few years for the least bad option. It should and can be an opportunity for people to come together to play an active part in improving their community. An opportunity to recognize the potential of individuals and of society. Recent decades has witnessed a booming industry of fake consultations that only leave people further disillusioned with the political system. But debate and action that can promote genuine participatory grassroots democracy is the only way out of our democratic crisis. And of course, a genuine democracy that listens to everyone must involve young people who have their own legitimate concerns and interests and have the most to lose from our current short-sighted trajectory. We welcome the focus on increasing youth involvement and practical proposals for doing this. And we are glad that these two motions are being discussed together, because the best way to increase youth involvement in politics is to ensure that politics is relevant and effective, and there are opportunities for real engagement. The opportunities and possibilities that a more participatory system can bring. To conclude, I would like to emphasize on the crucial role of the Council of Europe, the leading human rights organizations on our continent that stretches its influence far beyond. I am convinced that our organizations and precise convention system will help overcome some of the serious democratic challenges our society faces today. The people who are part of it will stand strong and continue their work to enhance democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In the debate, I now call for Mr. Lux on behalf of the Socialist Group.
Dankeschön, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear rapporteurs, dear Margaret, many thanks for these excellent words, for these good reports that are proposing many changes here in the Assembly and for our assemblies, our institutions as well. I think it's been said that young people aren't fighting for everyone, that they're not fighting for a whole group. And I would contest that. I would contest that if we have a look around us and see what young people from Belarus are organizing, so as to finally be rid of Lukashenko's dictatorships, not because they want freedom for themselves, but because they want freedom for everyone. When we have a look at Georgia, there we see young people at the avant-garde of a protest movement against laws that are unfriendly to NGOs and to the media, because these young people don't want their country to fall back into tsardom and be subjected to Moscow, but rather they want freedom, and freedom for everyone. And it must be our task as the Council of Europe, as a Parliamentary Assembly, to let these young people who do not have the same rights and possibilities that I have, to make their voice heard and to give them a platform. And this is particularly true when we look at what is happening in Ukraine today. And we see that the future and the very lives of young people in this brutal war being led by Putin, and how these are being sacrificed. When we're talking about reconstruction, then young people must also have a meaningful role to play. And it's very important for our European young people in Ukraine and in the diaspora be given specific support, especially when we talk about access to social rights, to physical and mental health care, to education, and to a discrimination-free life. And finally, an example of young people who are fighting for all and not just for themselves. Let's have a look at some of our neighboring countries like Iran, where young men and women are leading a protest movement because they want freedom. And they want freedom for everyone. Not Eastern or Western, but universal freedom. We, as the Council of Europe, must give young people a voice that cannot be heard today. That is the task we must all fight for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call for Madam Jasko on behalf of the EPP. You have 3 minutes.
Let me congratulate our reporters for providing us this discussion. Some may say that it's very theoretical, but in fact, this is a very serious attempt to rethink what democracy of today we need to have. Democracy is not only, a word, it's actually about institutions, it's about participation, it's about voting. And we know that our democracies in all the member states are having not the best times now, and there are reasons for that. This is an attempt to think what we were doing not right, that all of this is undermined. But I want to also stress that I belong to a generation of Ukrainians who from very early age were having a feeling of responsibility that we need to be active in politics. Seriously, since I was very young, I knew that I want to go into politics because I wanted to take an action to change things in my country. And you know, I studied abroad, I worked abroad, and I've learned that it's not the case of the people my age in many of the member states. Some of them are feeling not empowered, some of them are feeling unheard, some of them, as our reporter said, does my vote really count? Actually, doesn't make sense to vote. So I think it's very important to do the advocacy for the political participation, because people need to know that it's worth going into politics, that you can make a change in politics. And this is a task for all of us here, to show it by our example or by the solutions or tools that we can offer. It's not only about the voting a resolution. What kind of tools do we have for our democracies? I want to stress something very important. Many would say we have referendums, but referendums are not working well in all of the countries. They actually also can be very manipulated and can be very dangerous. Artificial intelligence, digital democracies. If we want to know that our votes are protected if we vote digitally, we need to design the tools that we will provide that. Because if we don't want to end up in the situation that we currently have in European Parliament elections results, we see that there are many far right or left voters of this Parliament elections. Why did it happen this way? So I want to ask, let's continue rethinking of what tools do we need to have to protect our democracies, but also, please, let's advocate for the political participation at every level so that the young people, and not only young people, will believe that it's possible and it's worth going into politics and making a change there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the list of speakers on behalf of political groups. We'll now continue with the rest. In the debate, I call next Lord Foulkes. You have 3 minutes.
Can I first of all confess that I speak with some hesitation on this topic, because I think I'm probably the oldest member present, by a couple of weeks anyway. And nevertheless, that hasn't stopped me in the past, and it's not stopping me now. From a British perspective, there are 2 key threats to our democracy. First is dark money influencing our politics, and the second is the increasing level of disengagement we have, particularly among young people. And the second issue is partly a product of the first. A more transparent system which effectively filtered out big money, or at least took some steps, initial steps, towards limiting the influence of the mainly anonymous, wealthy individuals, would restore a trust in our politics. We've got ideas about how to achieve this: closing loopholes in the electoral finance laws, empowering our electoral commission to investigate abuses, and tightening requirements around revealing the sources of funding. But our current government lacks the political will to enact these changes. The next government won't. But we recognize, the public recognize these problems. Surveys have shown that there have been long-term decline in the public's perception of the transparency of both party and campaign finance. And the longer that we ignore the need for a reform, the greater the impact will be on our quality of our democracy. Something as simple as enhancing the UK Electoral Commission's powers would go a long way to resolving this, such as threats of higher fines, combined with new powers to launch investigations and to impose our sanctions. That would help stem the flow of dark money influencing our elections. All of these measures have broad support from the Committee on Standards in Public Life, from civil society, and from academia. Only blocker is the current Parliament. Now on youth. A recent survey indicated 40% of young people don't intend to vote in this upcoming general election. And this extends beyond, the reluctance extends beyond the opaque party financing system. Issues such as the voting system itself, as well as the party's offers, the way we teach politics in schools, all contribute to young people's apathy. But I believe we could go a long way to driving up engagement by one thing, by simply extending franchise through lowering the voting age to 16. We've done it for the Scottish Parliament in the United Kingdom, and it's proving successful. The next government in the United Kingdom will lower the voting age to 16. I hope the parliaments of other member states will do likewise.
Thank you very much. In the debate, I call next Mr. O'Reilly. You have 3 minutes.
President, is my mic on? Sorry. Thank you, President. Can I begin?
Put your badge in.
Yeah.
Joe. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, President. By recognizing somebody who would be the most inspirational speaker today if she were here. Sadly, Baroness Doreen Massey has left us and recently, and I want to say that she was a visionary, inspirational and pioneering woman in the area of youth participation, of organising young people, and as chair of the youth subcommittee of the Parliament. I think Doreen Massey was the greatest pioneer of youth participation that I've ever encountered, and I found her absolutely motivational and encouraging. And I would say that this Assembly should honour her appropriately at some future time. And working with Doreen Massey, I brought over the National Youth Movement from Ireland here to Strasbourg, and we had hearings with them through the Youth Subcommittee. And it was participative, and they were listened to, and they talked a lot about climate change and issues relevant to young people. I think we need to make a policy of bringing young people from all our member states here to Strasbourg, here to get listened to, here to be involved in discussion. And we need to act on what they say. And I think a policy and a budget of doing that is a requisite that we need to put in place. There is, sadly and tragically, right across Europe, a threat to democracy, in that sinister forces are, through exploitation of racism and other emotive campaigns and slogans, are bringing some young people tragically down the road of far-right politics, of anti-democratic tendencies, as happened, sadly, back in the late 20s, early 30s before, in the 1920s, 30s. And we need to guard against that. And youth participation, youth involvement, youth at the coalface of democracy being listened to in the way that Doreen Massey would have wanted them listened to, is the method by which you positively distract them from this kind of involvement. I do believe that we should have youth rapporteurs, as the report suggests, and I congratulate the rapporteurs there, but that we should have youth rapporteurs here working as a collegiate, as a group within the Council of Europe. It is the case, as Lord Foulkes, my great friend, says, that there is dark money involved in politics, and that dark money can, and indeed in his own country in the UK, has had some very adverse effects, and can have adverse effects in any country. And for that reason, I think it is critical that we really focus on our youth and bring our youth with us, make our youth feel that they are genuinely part of our democracy, of our pace here, and that we are listening to them. A failure to do this will, by default, increase anti-democratic forces right across our member states. I think this is an extraordinarily important debate. I think it is an extraordinary opportunity for us to embark on a new process of youth involvement, youth presence here, youth being listened to. I'm a former teacher myself, and I'm a parent of 3 sons, and I do know that young people who are not listened to, who feel that they're not listened to, and who feel that there's no action on foot of their words, those young people become alienated, demotivated, and they may not speak about it, but we've lost them to democracy and to participatory democracy, which is the really critical thing. So, on that note, I leave it, but I do hope that we act on this after today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Madam Bartos. You have 3 minutes.
Dear fellow representatives, elected politicians and international organizations are similar in that they operate on the basis of the trust capital they received from the people. Recent research shows that this trust capital has been seriously eroded in both directions for politicians and international organizations. This points to the need to strengthen trust. This can be done in a number of ways, such as involving people in the decision-making process. That is why I welcome today's debate and congratulate to the rapporteurs. In connection with our topic, I would like to present a method, a tool, which has proved successful in Hungary. This is the national consultation. Since 2010, the government has solicited the opinion of voters in the form of national consultations, a total of 13 times. Many priority governmental measures have been preceded by consultation. The national consultation have thus helped to create points of agreement between the government and Hungarian citizens. In addition, national consultations are a well-established tool for the Hungarian people to decide on issues that affect their lives. In recent years, there have been 11 national consultations in which citizens have received a postal questionnaire with a letter of response, and 2 times in which the consultation has conducted exclusively online. The national consultations covered the following topics and issues: fundamental law, social issues, economic issues, migration and terrorism, the future of the Hungarian internet, which could only be answered online, debates on national and EU competencies, international plans and international plans on migration, family protection. In 2020 and 2021, 3 national consultations related to the coronavirus epidemic and restarting economy took place. In 2022, the Hungarian government was the first EU government to ask citizens about the Brussels sanctions. The last consultation was launched at the end of 2023 on the protection of our country's sovereignty. The national consultations mobilized 1 to 1.5 million people on average, the young generation also, but there were some in which 2.3 million people participated. Dear colleagues, our own experience shows that involving people in the decision-making process has many benefits. Our joint efforts in this regard must be strengthened. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Cotier. You have 3 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, President. A few days ago, we marked the 150th anniversary of the Constitution of the Swiss Confederation from 1874, which established a popular instrument. Nobody could have imagined this happening in Switzerland today. It was to institute the referendum, not just to consult the population, but for the population to challenge a law from Parliament. With 50,000 signatures amongst the 9 million inhabitant population, it's not straightforward, but it's achievable. And it allows the population to take a stand, take a decision on the basis of a law enacted by Parliament. And I would like to encourage the member states of this organization and the countries with which we work to contemplate introducing in their constitutions and political systems this sort of instrument. And I congratulate Mr. Papandreou, the rapporteur, for his recommendations in his report, which is an outstanding report. I fully support it. But we're somewhat upstream from this, and with very clear-cut criteria and well-thought-through criteria, we could establish these mechanisms for consultation and discussion in order to hear people's views. But I don't think it goes far enough. It's fine to give the population the possibility to speak, but you also need to allow them to take decisions. And some of these instruments may be viewed in countries as rather delicate, but when the population is accustomed to this sort of practice, even in complicated issues, they answer the question which is asked. And in Switzerland, we really have this system where on some 12 issues a year, the population takes a stand on quite complex issues, and they answer the question. This mechanism exists not only at the federal level, but at the cantonal level and at the local level, and it allows for real implementation and decision-making. My parliamentary colleagues, I think several of us in this room, don't want to reject this mechanism, even if they call into question the decisions. It's a safety valve, allowing the population to say what they support and don't, and then the government then has to get to work. And I think it's an instrument which I think we would do well to reflect on at length, because it really is in everyone's interest. And I welcome the report on youth. It's very important to incorporate youth in this process, and the report makes specific recommendations to that end. To my mind, that we don't need to give youth a crutch, so to speak, or quotas. And I don't think we need to set aside seats for youth. We just need a dialogue with them and allow them to learn fast and learn how to get involved. And then each and everyone has to do their job without necessarily having specific seats for youth. I think that goes too far, and it may even be counterproductive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Madam Floridia. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll speak in Italian. Ringrazio.
I'd like to thank the colleague, Georgios Papandreou, for having highlighted the importance of strengthening the processes of participatory and deliberative democracy in order to revitalize our democracies. His proposed resolution seeks to explore innovative approaches, inspiring democratic thinking, considering new practices and measures at the national, regional, and local levels, focusing also on the importance of education. Democracy is the only political model which is compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights, and still, we're seeing a continuous worsening of the democratic process in Europe and across the globe, a worsening which is exacerbated when the checks and balances of the democratic system are weakened, jeopardizing the balance of powers. In this situation of democratic precariousness, there's also been a worsening of distrust of citizens in public institutions and political parties, and an increase in loss of interest in electoral participation, which is crucial for representative democracy at the regional, national, and European level. We are witnessing the spreading of a new narrative, a continuous transformation, and often violent, which plays on negationism, on fear of diversity, and produces divisive, aggressive, and populist positions. To get out of this downward spiral today, more than ever, we need a systemic, permanent approach, allowing us to establish a continuous dialogue and trust with civil society, as set forth in the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. Wherever there is a proper dialogue, then we may be collectively aware of what our community wants, guaranteeing their participation in public decisions which have an influence on their lives, and above all, guaranteeing the futures of coming generations. It's also particularly important to guarantee in a second phase that the opinions produced through participatory democracy are taken fully into account in public decisions, and clear explanations and transparent explanations are given when they're not adopted. Citizens and the young generations need training and information to be active agents in the processes of participatory democracy. New generations therefore need to be more involved in democratic processes, and that is a particular task for the Council of Europe.
Of a youth quota should be stronger considered, discussed and promoted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Oikonomou. You have 3 minutes.
First of all, I would like to thank and to congratulate Mr. Papandreou and Mr. Hadjivasiliou for their very interesting points, and now allow me to speak in Greek.
Ladies and gentlemen, the recent European elections have confirmed the tendency that we've seen in recent years in the Western world for reduced participation in elections of all kinds. It's true that Parliamentary Assembly democracy has become more participatory. It has given the floor to those groups that were either underrepresented or marginalised. It gave the possibility for people to vote when they didn't have any property, or whether they were women or citizens or non-natives of that country. So the people felt that the parliaments have in fact lost a large part of their power, either from the governments or from transnational bodies where people who are not elected directly by the people rule. And we see that this continues to hurt and harm democracy. The increased number of technocrats and ceding the decision-making powers to people without direct legitimacy is something that harms democracy, because these technocrats adopt policies that don't take into account political will and the reality of people on the ground. Also, because oftentimes we talk about the ancient Greek democracy, we have to be very careful of one key parameter. Ancient Greek democracy had as its cornerstone the common good, that everything was done in favour and for the city and the people. Socrates, in the polity, said that what we wanted to do as a duty was to secure the common good. This, of course, meant that there was indifference about individual rights, which, in fact, was swept aside in favour of the rights of everybody. But thankfully, due to enlightenment, we managed to improve things. But now we, in fact, and sometimes looking more at identity politics. And I think we need to strike a new balance where the common good will be secured without ignoring the rights of individuals. And I think that we need to take into account 3 issues. First and foremost, we need to see that there's low-quality discourse. Policy and politics, in order to motivate people, need to have sweeping visions. Politics without ethics was, in fact, a form of injustice. Without value and principles cannot motivate the people. The substitution of policy without a compass, in fact, meant that politics have lost out in Greece and Europe and elsewhere. And we see that we have, in fact, got more autocracy in our continent, but this was caused because citizens are not interested. This undermines democracy and leads us to oligarchy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the debate, I next call Mr. Canbay. You have 3 minutes.
Dear President, dear colleagues, today it is apparent that we stand at a critical juncture in the history of democracy, both in Europe and globally. We cannot ignore the stark realities before us: democratic backsliding, diminishing civic spaces, and a growing disillusionment among citizens, as well as blatant violation of international humanitarian law right before our eyes, most recently in Gaza and Ukraine. We can bridge the gap between the governance and the governed, ensuring that policies reflect the genuine needs and aspiration of all segments of society by involving citizens directly in decision-making. I would like to thank Mr. Papandreou for putting a spotlight on such an important but often neglected topic. One of the most effective ways through which the people can take part in democratic process is undoubtedly through media. As a journalist by education with 15+ year experience in public communication, I place particular importance in the role the media plays in political life, both through traditional channels and social networks. In our country, citizens are also participating in decision-making processes through political party membership in substantial numbers. Parties in Turkey have more than 50 million members from all walks of society. AK Party has more than 11 million members, along with a lively and active youth program that produces political leaders and even parliamentarians. Participatory democracy, complemented by deliberative process, offers a robust framework for addressing complex issues our democracies are facing. By fostering open dialogue and inclusive decision-making, we can forge consensus, promote sustainable policies, and strengthen the resilience of our democracy in the face of uncertainty. Last but not least, I firmly believe that the rapporteur's call to include elements of education for democratic citizenship and human rights education in the curricula for formal education is vital importance. It goes without saying, education is the cornerstone upon which democratic values are imparted and upheld. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Munkachu. You have 3 minutes. He seems not to be in the room. Then I call on Mr. Verducci. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, President, colleagues. Democracy is the most important good in terms of public awareness, but it's weak awareness and it's under attack. And it's important in new generations to build and strengthen new democratic resilience. We're seeing a structural, deep-seated crisis and a political crisis on democracy, and there's a need for a response which is genuinely political. Democracy is not static, it's not neutral, it will be emancipatory if we ensure there are changes in terms of better living conditions in people's lives. The crisis of democracy is first and foremost a social issue. The intolerable inequality and the impossibility for millions of people to fulfill their own life projects. Democracy is first and foremost forms of participation. In recent years, we have seen parliaments and collective institutions being weakened, and there's a need to have. We've seen the introduction of laws which are majority-based, which restrict the democratic space and participation and pluralism, restricting rights and social status, and marginalizing ever greater swathes of society. And the abstentionism is so great that there's a risk of having a representative democracy without representation. And this crisis in legitimacy is being taken advantage of by the far right with an authoritarian model to concentrate all powers without checks and balances in the hands of just a few, with disinformation against the judiciary and minorities, which is what we're seeing, and which has to be opposed. And we're talking about the fundamental layers of a civil society. And if you have the use of plebiscites, then it will only weaken democracy. And this is a deception, which is not only just a threat to democracy, it's the end of democracy. And we're at a crucial turning point in history, and we cannot be idle observers. We're seeing a resurgence in war and the use of hate speech and financial and technical interests, which are extremely powerful. And it's a time with risks to go against democracy. And for democracy, the only vital space for citizens means that we must transform this time, this difficult time, into a new democratic century. Particularly, I think this should be our challenge here to bolster and relaunch democracy from this Council of Europe.
Thank you very much. I now call on Ms. Tsitlidze. You have 3 minutes.
First of all, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the reporter. Thank you very much for this incredible job. During this very challenging time for democracy, it's crucial that we all need to become more engaged to uphold the fundamental principles of democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the European Council, today we are confronted with a pivotal challenge in our commitment to democracy: the urgent need to reinforce participatory and deliberative processes across the Council of Europe. This discussion is particularly important in light of recent events in Georgia, where the very essence of democracy has come under threat, and where the young generations are fighting for the European future of Georgia. In Georgia, the ideals of democracy have faced significant challenges. Russian oligarch Ivanishvili's attempts to undermine the European future of Georgians and manipulating the democratic processes are deeply concerning. Young Georgian peoples in the streets of Tbilisi and around the country are fighting for freedom and for European integration of Georgia. And special forces of oligarch Ivanishvili beats them in the streets of Tbilisi. But they are not afraid, and I'm proud of them. On April 29, pro-Russian oligarch Ivanishvili gave a speech stating that he would punish the pro-European opposition. Oligarch Ivanishvili's speech also insinuated that the European Union have sought to undermine Georgia's sovereignty, called Global War Party. Reinitiating Russian-style law on foreign influence, the oppressive nature of the Georgian Dream and pro-Russian oligarch Ivanishvili openly incited hostility towards pro-European oppositional parties, civil activists, and young peoples. Georgian Dream regime has been further highlighted by the violent dispersal of peaceful demonstrators and targeted brutal physical attacks on civil activists, young peoples who are critical to government, and politicals, including former chair of UNM, Levan Habaishvili. It's imperative that we, as members of the Council of Europe, stand united in condemning such actions and supporting young people of Georgia fight to the European integration and for the freedom of their country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. O'Loughlin. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to commend the rapporteurs for their excellent work on this really, really important topic. because the fire within the heart of our youth certainly can be the catalyst for positive change within society and with all of the communities that we represent. And indeed, the power of youth can be a common wealth and a common good for the entire Europe. We need the idealism, we need the enthusiasm, we need the exuberance of young people. With the Reykjavik Declaration adopted just over a year ago now, it's really good to see the Council of Europe moving ahead in developing standards internationally for working with and for young people. The integration of a youth perspective in the Council of Europe's intergovernmental and other deliberations is really, really important, and this can only help strengthen our democracies. I want to commend the Joint Council on Youth for their document on elements for a Council of Europe reference framework for a youth perspective at its plenary last October, and the 4 key areas that they concentrated on were about thinking alongside with the youth, learning from and with our youth, participating with our youth, and acting with them. When I think about young people being involved in politics, I think particularly in relation to 2 really important referenda that we had in Ireland, where we had hashtag home to vote. So many of our younger people who were studying abroad, working abroad, but they all came home to participate in 2 really important democratic events. And one was about extending marriage equality to LGBT community, and one was in relation to repealing the 8th Amendment and supporting the right to choice in a limited context, but at the same time changing our legislation to support that. And young people really found that power of their own voice, and since then have certainly become far more involved in our decision making. And of course, Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Child requires that children and young people's views must be considered and taken into account in all matters affecting them. And in Ireland, we do that through the Department of Children and ensuring that young people have a voice in the design, delivery and monitoring of government policies, programmes and services at national and local level. And I also think of the young people who put themselves forward for election. In our last local election on the 7th of June, the youngest candidate was in my own district, a young 18-year-old from a traveller background who only missed out by a matter of about 50 or 60 votes being elected. But we must do everything that we can to ensure that youth participation at every level. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. And next I call Mr. Goncharenko. You have 3 minutes.
Dear Chair, thank you very much, and I would like to thank Rapporteur for an excellent job done. And we are speaking now about youth perspective and youth participation. And by this we usually what we mean? That young people should take part in politics, that we want young people to vote. Here there are young people watching what we are doing. I say hello to you. But I want to tell hello, yes, and we are happy to see you, and that's very good that you are with us. But I want to share our pain with you. Because while we're speaking about some earth in general, without names, which we want to participate in politics, to be part of democracy, to protect democracy, there are exact young people from Ukraine who took weapons in their hands to fight for democracy. Not just to vote, to fight for democracy, to stop aggressors, to give all us possibility to be here, to give you possibility to come in a peaceful Strasbourg, in peaceful France, in peaceful Europe, to watch how here politicians are debating. And these young men, many of them, unfortunately, now are killed by Russians, and some of them are imprisoned by Russians. And I want to speak about Azovstal defenders, first of all, and other prisoners of war. These young heroes, 20, 23, 25 years old, they went to fight for democracy with their weapons in their hands to protect all of us here. That was their choice. And that is our responsibility today, to save them from what Russia is doing with them. They're torturing them every day. They're killing them. They're not giving them possibility to come back. They are prisoners of war for more than 2 years. Just imagine this. Just imagine how their families live. And we need to take that if they will not vote today, if they will not protect democracy today, tomorrow they will need to fight for it with weapons in their hands. So it's so important to protect democracy when it's still possible without weapons. So that is why, that's what we can do in strengthening youth participation. And I want to address all of you. You are representatives of so many parliaments. Please, coming back to your parliaments, make a special meeting, maybe in some committee, about Ukrainian prisoners of war. Help to save these thousands of people, many of them, majority of them, who are young like your children, just to give them chance to come back home. And then invite these young people to your parliaments, watch them, show them, speak with them, and give them possibility to share with you why democracy matters and why they were ready to sacrifice their lives in order to protect democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Tornaritis. You have 3 minutes. Then I call on Mr. Hanko. You have 3 minutes. He's not in the room, so I call on Mr. Davis. You have 3 minutes.
Earlier this year, the Pew Research Center released public opinion data that should alarm us all in this hemicycle. In 11 of 22 countries surveyed, including Canada, research found a significant decline in the share of the public describing representative democracy as a very good way to govern. There were several unsurprising reasons for this. For one, many said that they don't feel that politicians care what they think. And moreover, they don't feel that anyone is representing their views. There was, however, a silver lining. Many of these very same people see hope for improvement. Today, I'd like to discuss one possible reform that I believe will inject that hope for the future. Rapporteur Chatzivassiliou, the report makes several useful recommendations on how to increase youth engagement in political decision-making at the national level. One, for example, is to align the voting age and the eligibility age to run for office. To me, that's only common sense. If one can choose a representative, one could be a representative. And thankfully, that's already the case in Canada. But I'd like to have seen a bolder recommendation that states consider making 16 the legal voting age, even as we may set a higher age to hold office. In Canada, like in most countries, only those 18 and above are eligible to vote. My party in the Canadian Parliament has been pushing to lower that to 16 for years, convinced by the research that's shown the positive impacts of allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to cast a ballot. For that reason, I look forward to hearing the views of the rapporteurs and my colleagues from Austria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Greece, and Malta on the subject, who all already allow citizens 16 and over to vote. Colleagues, let's consider some facts. The history of the franchise is one of constant movement, from expanding voting to men of nobility, of property, from the age of 30 to 21 to 18, to women, to Indigenous people, etc. Many 16 and 17-year-olds work and pay taxes, yet they have no say in how their contributions are spent. This is a fundamental violation of representative democracy. In many countries, 16 and 17-year-olds are trusted to drive, join the military, be incarcerated, even marry with parental consent. Youth are informed and engaged as never before. In my experience, campaigning, youth are often better motivated and informed than many adults that I speak to. Their time horizons are the longest of us all. Decisions that we make today will affect them perhaps 80 years from now. Most importantly for this debate, research shows that citizens who vote in the first elections they qualify for are likely to become lifelong voters. If we combine civics training on a nonpartisan basis, exploring our democratic processes, parties, and issues in our secondary schools, with voting in elections, we can better prepare and produce informed, engaged voters. Colleagues, our world needs the optimism, energy, ideas, and participation of youth, and frankly, our democracies depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Bichel. You have 3 minutes.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, it is in fact so that politics must respond to the point of view, expectations, and concerns of young people so that democracy can properly function. Young people bring dynamism and new ideas into politics. And yes, young people in national parliaments are sometimes less strongly representative than middle-aged people. For young people, the fact that young people have less contact or activity in traditional politics than older people is unfortunately a secret for no one. But I do think that when we look at the different possibilities we see here, it's not that there are necessarily only presuppositions and barriers that are a problem. It's also true, I think, that we need to be very careful when we talk about quotas for different levels in politics, whoever may be concerned. It's obviously true that younger people are more strongly affected by decisions because they're going to live longer in this world than we older people will. That's also been said. And therefore, I welcome the idea that the Council of Europe should be part of the avant-garde and open up the way for participation of younger people. And the successes we have had in the 50 years of existence of the Council of Europe for young people and the many contributions that young people have had, I think are an element of proof of the very important work that is being done here. And I think it's good that the committees of this assembly have a youth rapporteur named so that the perspective of young people be brought on board in our debates. And whenever it's possible, members of youth councils and other structures for young people in the Council of Europe should also be asked to contribute to the preparation of reports. They should participate in hearings and exchanges and be able to enrich decision-making level with their contributions. And the number of young people in parliamentary delegations should not, I think, be increased, however, using quotas. If we think seriously that we want to strengthen democracies, and we have not only parliaments, but also parties dictate such youth quotas, then I think in terms of democratic policy, ladies and gentlemen, we will be on the wrong track. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Escalay. You have 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, colleagues, deliberation and participation of citizens beyond choosing the representatives is not only good and needs to be encouraged, but is a key component of the right to civic and political participation. Our institutions have a democratic deficit. It is not only punctuated by the worrisome rise of authoritarian politics in Europe, but also by disaffection, dissatisfaction, and a disconnect between citizens and the representative institutions. The challenges we face regarding democratic rights lie not only in the eastern frontier of Europe or in the rise of far-right movements, but in our very own institutions. We see so in the lack of formal opportunities for political participation beyond the election of representatives and occasional, narrowly framed consultations. Our institutions are Victorian and ill-equipped. There is, in this sense, a need still to harness the tools that technology has to offer in the service of democracy, as large language models revolutionize artificial intelligence. We need also to ensure that the human perspective is not substituted, but enhanced by AI, as we come ever closer to artificial general intelligence. The report on strengthening democracy outlines very well the need to promote good practices and to find new mechanisms for civic participation. Taking a side step, I will suggest that participation is not only useful for its legitimacy value, but also because it creates collective and actionable intelligence. It enables to more effectively address the problems we face. Representatives in assemblies and government officials bring to the table political, legal, and sectoral expertise, but to better address the challenges we need to collect and understand situational knowledge and citizens and their opinions. It is often neglected and yet crucial that open deliberation with citizens take place at the right moment. Very often, when it comes to deliberation, problem identification and problem solving are confused, so is commenting, drafting, and implementation. And yet, we have experienced in these processes. Social networks and online participation, for example, have been significantly more successful in defeating bad proposals than in creating good policies, as criticizing requires less knowledge than proposing solutions and waging alternatives. Democratic security, as portrayed in the Reykjavik Declaration, is a harbinger of the other human rights against democratic backsliding. Democratic participation from the grassroots, in the flesh, or mediated by technology ought to be institutionalized, as the report well says, beyond traditional elections. And I hope the approval of the two reports today is followed by our very own Council of Europe, engaging in a deeper debate on the better instruments for democratic rights and good governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Madam Göke. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, dear President and colleagues. Now, Turkey has a sophisticated political culture ensuring election security and citizens' trust in ballot box. Since 1950, our country consistently achieved one of the world's highest voter turnout rates, averaging 82%. Last May, Turkey achieved the third highest election participation rate among OECD countries, with 89% in the first round and 86% in the second round of our presidential elections. While the right to vote is vital, it's not the only element of democracy. Of course, establishing bridges between citizens and political institutions is essential, as noted in the report. Making people agents in decision-making mechanisms is crucial, and for example, in our 2010 and 2017 referendums on constitutional amendments in Turkey exemplified the true spirit of democracy in action through direct public participation. These moments highlighted the people's power to shape the nation's destiny, reaffirming their role as the ultimate decision makers. With over 11 million members, the AK Party stands as Turkey's largest political movement embodying the fundamental practice of participatory democracy. Alongside different activities, we conduct home visits and advisory councils to listen to the demands of our women and youth, ensuring that we hear every voice in society and develop tailored policies. And as I served 9 years as the vice chair of the women branch, I'm so enthusiastic about our work in different participatory activities with the largest women's movement, over 5 million women members and 500,000 active volunteers. We are functioning like a school for nurturing women politicians. So by promoting inclusivity and grassroots involvement, we cultivate a sense of belonging, stimulate the emergence of different diverse ideas, and enhance communication and build trust among citizens. Lowering the voting age and candidacy age has injected new vibrancy into our democracy, empowering our youth to actively participate in shaping the future of our nation. We cultivate future leaders through our political academies, and also many municipalities in Turkey have established new units called solution decks. We have an initiative like GMAR, called the Presidency's Communication Center, the world's largest public communication platform, exemplify our commitment to functional participatory democracy by facilitating citizens' right to petition and access information, ensuring transparency and responsiveness in governance. Through these efforts, we strengthen the connection between representatives and the public, ensuring governance remains accountable and citizen-centric. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call on Lord Blancantra. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, Mr. President, I thank the rapporteur, Mr. Papandreou, for all the work he's put into this report and for his good intentions to widen democracy. Nevertheless, I'm deeply concerned that what he proposes will weaken the rights of elected members and give more power to unelected and single-issue pressure groups. Of course, we all want more people to take an interest in how their country is run and to participate by then voting for representatives. If you don't vote, then don't complain about the government. In my 40 years in Parliament, I've seen the rise of the dictatorial single-issue pressure groups and the way they try to force elected members to follow one extreme position or another. If a Member of Parliament says that he or she sees a case for abortion, but with certain limits, then he or she gets abuse from those who want no abortion at all and those at the other end who want a free-for-all. These groups see everything in black and white, but elected members have to balance all the rights: the right to free speech, but not to be defamed; the right to good pensions in old age, but not bankrupting the smaller number of young people who have to pay for them. Mr. Papandreou believes that we can create a system where we will get well thought out and balanced views from a well-informed electorate. I'm afraid I fundamentally disagree. The system will be hijacked by pressure groups, the most well-funded, the most articulate, and possibly the most extreme. Look at the recent EU elections. If, in addition to those who voted conventionally, let's say we had some additional participative system, then I suggest that the results from that would have even been more radical. Elected parliamentarians these days are under constant attack, including one of my colleagues who was murdered. But they are daily under abusive attacks in social media unless they adopt absolutist positions on issues. Okay, as elected representatives, they have to tolerate it, but then use their best judgment to balance the different rights and vote accordingly, and then justify their decisions to the general electorate. But not those involved in the participative democracy system. They have no electorate, they have no need to explain, they have no accountability and no comeback. And then we have the big new danger, artificial intelligence. This Council has already passed resolutions expressing our concerns on how this can be manipulated to thwart democracy. I'm sure that Presidents Putin and Xi would be delighted if we implement participative democracy, since they are the world experts at creating fake news and running false stories. I believe it would be disastrous for us to give them the levers of power also. It is important, vitally important, that people participate in democracy, but it must be done through the elected representatives. And governments should make it easier for elected representatives to involve the public, inform the public, and collect their views and opinions. And then elected members must decide, make the laws, and justify them to the electorate. Anything else, I suggest, is anarchy and handing over power to computer algorithms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I call on Mr. Caddick. You have 3 minutes.
Colleagues, at a time when French democracy is experiencing, as others in Europe, upheavals, I'd like to thank our colleagues for these reports, which shed a light on what challenges we have to face up to, both in terms of our deliberative processes as well as in terms of better involvement of young people in the work of our Assembly. I'd like, first of all, to reaffirm my deep attachment to representative democracy. It may not be perfect, and it is certain that even though it's not being called into question, it is at least being questioned because there's a form of political weariness based on the rise of populism and also as a result of misinformation or disinformation within our citizens, which is exacerbated by the rise of social networks and the growing need for there to be a link between people governing us and people who are governed between both elections, between two elections. However, when it comes to facing complex problems, it's certainly not TikTok democracy which is going to be in a position to promote calm and sustainable solutions. Representative democracy, I think, is the indispensable platform for cohesion within our societies and its ability to implement and maintain over the long term respect for democracy, the rule of law and human rights that we, of course, feel very strongly about. Of course, I'm sympathise with the comments made by colleagues of the importance of better factoring in the point of view of our citizens between two elections, whether this be at local or national level. Now, a referendum may be the most straightforward means of getting all population to take part in political decisions. I don't think it needs to be related to simple questions that can be easily understood by citizens. Our Swiss colleagues have a long-standing tradition of popular votes, referendums. This is not, though, the case in all states, and we need to factor in political traditions to strike the right balance. Other forms of participative processes are already have also developed over the past decades. This is the case, for instance, for consultative assemblies, be they standing or not, which can make recommendations on specific questions. We've tried this out in France with the so-called citizens' conventions, which are convened ahead of the presentation of a draft bill. Now, this is of some interest, but I think we need to issue a word of warning with regard to the membership and independence of these bodies, which is sometimes very much under the strong influence of lobbyists or activists, and this is a pitfall that needs to be underlined. I'd also like to share with you an initiative taken by the French Parliament, which wanted to revive the citizens' right of petition, which had fallen into disuse. In a Senate, petitions having gathered more than 100,000 signatures within a period of 6 months are passed on to the Conference of Presidents, which can then decide what action to take by, for instance, creating a supervisory mission or by including a text on the agenda or organising a debate in front of the public. This is one interesting way of combining citizens' initiative and representative democracy. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Frides. You have 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you very much indeed, President. Well, democracy is a basic platform of principle and essential freedoms. It's all about impartial justice, a rule of law, separation of powers, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and many other things. But then it's down to each state to organise how this is set up in its own way. And there are two extreme organisations of democracy. There's a horizontality and verticality. Let me start with verticality. That is vertical power. The possibility of exercising one's democratic rights with this particular setup is only done through the ballot box. That's representative democracies, but there's a majority election system, which means that a strong part of the population cannot be represented. And in a system, you may well have 30% of people who will have the absolute majority and others who have no longer influence or any power. Now, one example of a country not far from where I live, that is France, in fact, and we have a situation in which on occasions key bills, such as on retirement, are not voted on by the Parliament because there is specific legislation which is called 49.3, and then it's done through discussions because there's no possibility of a referendum. This is a vertical system. Now, the other extreme is what's known as a horizontal system. And Switzerland is certainly an example of this horizontal system with the direct democracy at all different levels in terms of the municipalities, the cantons, the regions, and the confederation as well, with elections that are held based on proportional representation, which means that everyone can be represented. And it goes further than this. There's a right to make a popular proposal with initiatives and referendums. My colleague, Mr. Coutier, mentioned this just now. There's a right to have oversight over decisions taken by Parliament at all different levels through a referendum. So the Swiss population votes more or less 4 times a year on 10 to 12 different matters, and this sparks a very participatory debate and very representative debate, and then people can vote in full knowledge of the facts. Participation turnout may be 50% or so, but I think most people trust the system because there is direct access to be able to express one's views. So participative, deliberative democracy, this means that signing in, buying into the whole system and there being social acceptance. In my country, we now reach a situation in which people following discussions vote and refuse, for instance, to have a fifth week of leave, or that they accept restrictions made to retirement, for instance. Now, I would certainly be in favour of more horizontal systems and fewer vertical systems, and it's for each country to decide to organise them as they want. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker before we'll have to interrupt the speeches will be Madam Mezantseva. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, dear Speaker. Hello, colleagues. Hello, dear representatives of youth who are here at the balconies, and not only. Today we are debating two extremely important resolutions, and I would like to thank the rapporteurs and, of course, the secretariats who helped to realize the text of these resolutions. I hope yet another time it would not remain just as documents, but they will be implemented when we talk about the voting rights, the age limits, the participation of youth in political life of the member states and beyond. And this is extremely important because youth is not our future, colleagues. Youth is the reality of today, and we should consider them as reliable partners, as initiators of important legislative initiatives and the front runners of the changes globally. When our member states are in numerous protracted armed conflicts, like my home country Ukraine, invaded illegally by Russian Federation since 2014, was full-scale invasion in February 22. And this very assembly sends a very right signal how we can support youth, how their participation impacts today and tomorrow when they become parents, when they join different political campaigns, when they stand up for their country as soldiers, women and men in the army, like they do, for instance, in Ukraine. Dear colleagues, in Ukraine, with the most prominent decentralization reform, we have more youth participation at the city councils, where we have youth as the leader of the changes. Later on, they become the members of this respected council, and they can influence actually the policies. I also would like to remind that we have a lot, we have quite a young parliament, but also local councils, and it helps us to promote the young policies. Recently, Ukraine has become 43rd member of the Bank of Reconstruction of the Council of Europe, and we now promote programs how to use these funds to support youth housing, youth participation, programs for technical support, delivering new skills, because this is about you, friends. Next days, you will replace us here in numerous assemblies, not only in the Council of Europe as one of the most prominent organizations for human rights for the last 75 years, but in many more other endeavors. And I would also like to say that PACE always supports national parliaments and youth, and I would like to encourage you to participate in the World Democracy Forum when it's you who are questioning politicians, when it's you who set up the priorities, when it's you who decide the future. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you very much. I must now interrupt the list of speakers. Speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that the typewritten text can be submitted electronically, if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. The ballot of the election of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe is still open. Those who have not yet voted may still do so by going to the lobby of the Committee of Ministers. The vote closes at 12:05 p.m. Now, I first call on Madam Chatsi-Vassiliou to, to reply. You have 3 minutes.
I would like, first of all, to thank Mr. Papandreou for his invaluable work, also Ms. Kravchuk and Ms. Vorykhava for their contribution. Moreover, I would like to thank the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy, our chairperson, and all my colleagues for their important contribution. And of course, I'm grateful to Mr. Tori, Mr. Colombo, and Ms. Despina Hadjivassiliou. So, dear colleagues, you know that less than 3% of parliamentarians globally are coming from the younger generation. Are we happy with this number? Less than 3% of deputies are coming from the youth. We are not happy with these statistics, dear colleagues. This is why we believe that whatever we decide in politics in many cases seems really irrelevant to the younger generation. They think that they don't have anything to do with whatever we decide behind the closed doors. And we never said that only the young people can or should decide for their issues. No, dear colleagues. We said here that we have to involve the younger generation in the decision-making process, and it's a pity that some political powers, political forces, deny the young generations its right to co-design, to co-decide, to have a stronger voice. We should not fear of young people's impetus and innovation, dear colleagues. And I have to tell you that today, as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe, our Parliamentary Assembly is ready to adopt a mechanism of credibility and, above all, inclusiveness. And here we have to deliver the commitment of the heads of state and government towards the younger Europeans. We have to build resilient democracies by involving the youth to our work. And yes, as Alexei told us before, there are young people in Ukraine that are fighting with weapons. Therefore, we have to allow to young Europeans to fight with democratic tools in order to strengthen our states and our democracies. And I'm very happy that we have a lot of young people here inside the chamber and in the audience. Welcome, welcome, dear friends. I have to tell you something. When we decided to run for the first time for a political office, I was almost 31 years old, with restricted financial and human resources. But I had a lot of stamina and devotion to my goal. This is why I call you to come and participate in this mechanism, to support this mechanism and come and work with us for a better European future. And allow me to remind you of what Churchill had said before. Never give in. Never, never, never. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Papandreou to reply. You have 3 minutes.
My report is a call for the spirit of educated engagement, where we can bring all into our political life. As someone mentioned, Mr. Economo, in ancient Athens, politics was not simply a fight for power. It was a capacity to imagine a much better future collectively and actually make it happen. And on the contrary, Lord David, democracy was a way to make sure that we do not have concentration of power. And as George Folks said earlier, this is one of the big problems of today's democracy. We have huge concentration of power, which is capturing our institutions, undermining our institutions, money in politics, wealth in media, wealth in lobbying. This here report is saying we have ways to find new forms of engagement, new forms of experimentation, which can rethink, restructure the powers that be, so that we make our societies more democratic, more participatory. So we should allow our imagination to move beyond what we know as daily routines in our politics. And we have seen that there are ways. Fiona from Ireland
mentioned a very important experience of the citizens' assemblies on such a difficult issue as abortion. There were no lobbies that made the decision. There were no single-issue groups that influenced. It was citizens with experts thinking deeply about the question. It was not a TikTok dialogue. It was a deeper dialogue, one informed and educated. This is what we want to see through engagement and through citizen participation. And there are many ways we should imagine. As Tassos very well said, and his proposals on the youth rapporteur for our committees, for all our work, this is of great importance. But there are other forums, internet platforms, where everybody has an equal voice on deliberating on policy. What if Facebook was actually owned not by Zuckerberg, but by all of us who use it?
Yes.
What if Twitter was not owned by Elon Musk, but was owned by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe? Our Swiss colleague talked about direct democracy. We have to learn from Switzerland, of course. And it's not only the opinion polls that should guide us. They are very artificial, they are static, they don't delve into a deeper understanding. They don't allow for participation, they allow for manipulation. So we need to find more participatory ways to truly make our democracy better. A final word. Participation and democracy was also a way to peacefully, not through polarization, not through violence, not through the power not through the law of the powerful, to make decisions, peaceful decisions. That's why democracy is linked for peace. That's why democracy is linked for the fight that Ukraine is giving, Georgia is giving, we are all giving for democracy and peace in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Would Mr. Emanuelis Singeris like to take the floor as Vice Chairperson of the committee? You have 3 minutes.
I just representing the Political Affairs Committee. We have unanimous support. George and Mr. Hachivasiliou and Madam Kravchuk, we have supported you during all our votes unanimously. So unanimously supported from all parties your struggle to finally bring the youth dimension and try to say how important during the war against us is to strengthen our democratic qualities inside of our democratic societies. When outside of our democratic societies, we have Belarus with every day arrested young people on the streets. We remember actually Mademoiselle Vorykhava, Madame Vorykhava, your revolution with the youth, more like 1 million in Minsk. We remember funerals of Navalny in Russia, where thousands of young people, not looking to the repressions, came to the funerals of Navalny, representing the other option of Russia. So, and we would like to ask you to be, after a speech of Madame Mezentseva, she a young person, leader of Ukrainian delegation from Kharkiv, who is bombed every day, bombed Kharkiv. We would like to ask you all on the balconies, be with Ukrainian youth, support them in every city, in every capital of our democratic nation, and please even be there and go and be supportive in Ukraine with them. Unite our forces against evil, against totalitarian attacks, against aggression against Ukraine. The youth of Georgia were very active, and we are encouraging you to be active. And we just have discussion about this in Georgia, about this law about foreign agents. And thank you for youngsters and young generation in Georgia being active on democratic front. From our point of view, having today the day dedicated to you, and I'm chairing actually the like dean of this assembly once a year opening like most old, like serving longest serving member. We should have the youngest serving member opening our assemblies here in a place where you are now sitting, not only the most serving. So we have building trust in politics. We're building just now trust in our political systems. Please don't vote, don't be involved in the hatred teams in Europe. Please choose your place to be among classical spectre of our party system presented here in the assembly. Be on the side of democracy, never on side of hatred. From my side, I would like to say that Reykjavik conference was a big deal. The Reykjavik summit was supporting the youth dimension. You have all documents presented by all rapporteurs, and I would like to say thank you for unanimous support to our common document, and you will now vote for that. I would like to encourage to unanimously show that we are supporting our young generation inside of our democratic society, fighting against hatred and radical trends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The debate is now closed. The Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has presented a draft resolution, document 16001, to which no amendments have been tabled. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16001. A simple majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. So the draft resolution in document 16001 is adopted. Congratulations. The Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has presented a draft resolution, document 15871, to which 10 amendments have been tabled. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. Any amendment which has been unanimously approved by the committees seized for a report shall not be put to the vote in plenary and shall be declared as definitely approved unless 10 or more members of the Assembly object. I understand that the chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1 to 10 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved, be declared approved. Is that so, Mr. Sengris?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Unanimously approved all amendments and to show absolutely unanimous support for this general item, making through amendments more precise. So unanimous support by all committee, by all amendments. It's actually a historical vote. Thank you.
So if no one objects, I will consider the amendments to be approved. Is there an objection? If there is, we will need to verify that the objection has the required support of 10 people. Please, could those who object raise their hand? That seems not to be the case. So amendments 1 to 10 to the draft resolution are therefore approved and will not be called. We'll now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15871 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The Draft resolution in document 15871 is adopted. Congratulations. And the ballot for the election of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe is now closed.
The President.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, now I have the pleasure to welcome among us Mr. Gabrielius Landsbergis, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania and President of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. Minister Landsbergis will present a communication about the ongoing and planned activities of the Lithuanian presidency before responding to questions from the parliamentarians. Thank you, dear President, for having accepted this exchange. Mr. President, this is the first time you address the whole Assembly. We, of course, already had a very interesting and fruitful exchange at our Standing Committee meeting in Vilnius at the end of May, and it is now little more than a month since you took over the CM presidency from Liechtenstein, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on what you have achieved so far. You can be sure count on the Assembly's assistance in your future projects, as we have already discussed just a few minutes earlier. In line with your main priority to support Ukraine and ensure Russia's accountability, our plenary meeting tomorrow is entirely dedicated to various debates on this subject. The Assembly also looks forward to collaborating with the Lithuanian presidency on other priorities, but first we look forward to hearing your address. Minister Landsbergis, Mr. President, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Mr. President of the Parliamentary Assembly, Madam Secretary General, members of the Parliamentary Assembly, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate this opportunity to address the Parliamentary Assembly in my capacity as the President of the Committee of Ministers. The Lithuanian presidency coincides with the 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe, the organization that played a significant role in Lithuania's recent history as a key supporter of our steps from the ruins of Soviet occupation into a strong democracy built on the rule of law and the respect for human dignity. Today, our continent faces the exact threat our organization was meant to counter. We are confronted by an adversary who believes that rules are created for the weak, while powerful are entitled to act above the law, who thinks he is free to kill and imprison without consequences and has scared or brainwashed his people to submission, who is convinced that our response will be timid and inconsequential, that our unity will wither, that if he holds long enough, we will get tired. Your strong and timely political recommendation to the Committee of Ministers to expel Russia was groundbreaking and for many of us brought back faith in our common institutions. But we have to remain clear-eyed. The Kremlin's regime is not affected by our condemnations and threats. Real action is the only thing that counts, and thus we must act. First, by making Russia pay compensation for all the damage it inflicts on Ukraine. As presidency, we will promote steps towards a comprehensive compensation mechanism, while focusing on expanding the membership of the Register of Damage. Second, by ensuring responsibility of political and military leadership of Russia and its accomplice Belarus for aggression against Ukraine. The Special International Tribunal has to be established and equipped to effectively reach and punish those who planned and initiated the aggression. The contribution from the Council of Europe is very welcome if it helps bring the ambition of the draft statute up to the necessary standard. Finally, we must continue taking steps for the protection of Ukrainian children who not just bear the brunt of the war, forced to study in subway stations and underground bunkers, but also face deportations and illegal adoptions aimed at erasing their national identity. I call for this organization to remain a driver of real action against Russia's aggression, because if we fail, the day after might turn out to be an even gloomier than today. Colleagues, now allow me to cover the main results achieved by the Committee of Ministers since the last session of the Assembly. The 133rd Ministerial session organized in Strasbourg on 16th and 17th May 2024 was attended by 35 ministers and has been the highlight of the last 3 months of activities. On the occasion, the previous presidency of Liechtenstein issued a declaration supported by 41 member states to mark the 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe. At this session, the ministers addressed a number of issues that also lie at the core of the priorities of the Lithuanian presidency. Firstly, the ministers adopted a set of decisions relating to Council of Europe support for Ukraine. The Committee of Ministers took further steps in relation to the Register of Damage as a first component of a comprehensive international compensation mechanism. It also enabled further work towards the establishment of a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. The Committee of Ministers also considered steps to provide better protection for the children of Ukraine and to ensure their immediate release by Russia and a safe return to Ukraine. All these issues related to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine will remain the key strategic priority of the Council of Europe. As I mentioned earlier, ensuring all possible support to Ukraine, assisting to recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine, as well as ensuring Russia's full accountability for international crimes, including the crime of aggression, is at the top of Lithuanian presidency priorities. As for the situation of the children of Ukraine, we need to intensify joint efforts. To help to ensure their safe return home, the Council of Europe could become a collective member of the Coalition for the Return of the Ukrainian Children. I welcome the recent appointment of a focal point for Ukrainian children and the Secretary General's resolve to initiate such accession. It is our obligation to also pay maximum attention to the blatant violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms in Russia-occupied territories of Ukraine, including Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea, that continue as we speak. Earlier this month, the Committee of Ministers examined the Secretary General's report on the human rights situation in the territories of Ukraine occupied by the Russian Federation. The committee adopted a series of decisions to address the appalling human rights situation on the ground and to call for further action against the aggressor. On the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the deportation of the Crimean Tatar people from the Crimean Peninsula by the Soviet totalitarian regime, the Lithuanian presidency, the President of the Assembly, the Secretary General, and the Human Rights Commission issued a joint statement. Our joint statement highlighted and condemned the ongoing persecution of Crimean Tatars by the Russian occupational authorities in Ukraine's Crimea. Finally, it is important for the Council of Europe to continue its participation in the International Crimea Platform. The 133rd session also dealt with the implementation of the Reykjavik Declaration adopted last year at the 4th Summit of Heads of State and Governments. The ministers took stock of what has been achieved so far. They also provided guidance on what should be done in relation to the key issues of the organization's mandate, such as strengthening the system of the European Convention on Human Rights, implementing the Reykjavik Principles for Democracy in a context of democratic backsliding, promoting the abolition of the death penalty, fighting violence against women, reinforcing protection of journalists, developing new standards in the field of human rights and the environment. The adoption of the Convention on Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights is a major outcome of the 133rd session. This new groundbreaking legal instrument will be open for signature in Vilnius this September, on the margins of the informal conference of the Ministers of Justice, and I invite all countries to sign it. Last week in Vilnius, we also hosted the European Dialogue on Internet Governance, where the Secretary General presented this convention and highlighted issues related to securing human rights and fundamental freedoms online. This digital dimension of freedom is one of the priorities for the Lithuanian presidency. Lithuanian presidency will ensure continuity and consistent implementation of the Reykjavik Summit decisions, the execution of judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, and strengthening the organization to meet the challenges of the future. We will also ensure continued support to civil society, independent media, human rights defenders from Belarus and other countries oppressed by authoritarian regimes, working in their home countries or in exile. In this context, we would be happy to host the Council of Europe Information Point for Belarus in Vilnius. Lithuania will seek to advance our long-standing horizontal priorities in all international human rights fora, namely freedom of expression and safety of journalists, fight against disinformation and hate speech. We will continue promoting gender equality and women's rights, good governance, and fight against corruption. On the latter, just a week ago in Vilnius, we hosted the International Anti-Corruption Conference with Secretary General's participation. Dear colleagues, the Committee of Ministers' activities during the reporting period also include the issue of Kosovo membership, the situation in Georgia, addressing hate crime, preparation for the high-level conference on the European Social Charter. Allow me to elaborate on some of them. Regarding Kosovo membership, on 5th of June, at the initiative of the Presidency, the Committee held exchange of views with Mr. Miroslav Lajčák, EU Special Representative for the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue and other Western Balkan regional issues. This exchange offered a wider horizon and a regional context for the issue at hand. The Presidency stands ready to play its role in the process to achieve mutually beneficial results. Regarding the situation in Georgia, the Committee continues to closely monitor developments in the country, including in Russia-occupied regions of Georgia. At the session, we took note of the Secretary General's consolidated report on Russia-Georgia conflict, indicating the human rights situation in the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and Thinvari region, South Ossetia, continues to deteriorate, underlining Russia's responsibility for this and reiterating our unequivocal support for Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. While fully supporting Georgia, that continues to defend its independence and territorial integrity, as President of the Committee of Ministers, I cannot ignore the worrying developments, including the newly adopted Foreign Agents Law and the attacks and intimidation campaign against Georgian civil society actors. All the attempts to silence Georgian civil society are unacceptable. They are incompatible with the values of Council of Europe, as well as with the EU membership perspective of Georgia. This new legislation was strongly criticized by international partners, the Secretary General, and myself in the capacity of the President of the Committee of Ministers, and runs counter to European standards as stated by the Venice Commission. I use this opportunity to once again call on Georgian authorities to repeal this law. Another element of the implementation of the Reykjavik Declaration, strengthening of social rights. Next week, Vilnius will welcome your ministers responsible for social affairs at the high-level conference on the European Social Charter. The Lithuanian Presidency is also keen to contribute to the good interinstitutional relations within the Council of Europe. We consider smooth interinstitutional dialogue a must for ensuring the coherence of our messages. We also remain firmly committed to promoting cooperation between the statutory bodies of the Council of Europe and all members and observer states to provide the best contribution to preserving and promoting the common values in Europe and beyond. Dear colleagues, allow me to conclude by thanking the Secretary General for all the work achieved during her term at the head of our organization, and wish every success to the new Secretary General who you are about to elect. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We will now proceed to questions to President and Minister Mr. Landsbergis. We will first hear questions from the speakers on behalf of the political groups, and then hear a response from Mr. Landsbergis to those questions. Please, will the speakers limit their intervention to 30 seconds? I remind colleagues that they should ask one single question and not make speeches. And I give the floor first to Mr. Frank Svabe, the leader of the Socialists, Greens and Democrats.
Mr. President, dear Minister, no speech, but thank you for your leadership. Thank you that you host us a standing committee in Vilnius, and I think you make it clear if you are in Vilnius, you have a different view. You see the situation in Europe through different eyes. I would like to ask you, thank you that you spoke about Kosovo. I want to ask you, I know you have to be a little bit a little bit diplomatic on it, but I would like to ask you, we decide here on an opinion with an 82% majority, so the Committee of Ministers asked us for our opinion. We gave an opinion. When do you think the Committee of Ministers can deal with this question to answer at the end to our opinion?
Minister Landsbergis, would you like to respond? Please go on, Minister. You have to press the button just once, and in 2 seconds it will be all right.
You sure?
It's okay.
If you're waiting for a red light, there's no red light here. The lights here are all green because we are supporting human rights, etc.
Well, thank you so much. It takes a bit to get used to. If you would allow me, then I would first answer the question in my capacity as a President of the Council of Ministers, Committee of Ministers, and then a couple of words on my national capacity. So PACE opinion had been forwarded to the Committee of Ministers to decide in accordance with the statute of the Council of Europe and relevant rules of procedure, under which modalities to adopt a resolution inviting Kosovo to become a member. Lithuanian presidency is well aware of the sensitive nature of the issue. As rightly pointed out in the opinion of the Assembly, the circumstances of the application of Kosovo are unprecedented in the history of the Council of Europe. Each application for membership is a standalone issue, which requires an individual approach. This is particularly the case with Kosovo. But we believe that everyone in Kosovo, including all persons belonging to its Serbian minority, should have European perspective and access to the European Court of Human Rights. Council of Europe action could contribute to the resolution of the conflict. I encourage dialogue between the parties. As a President of the Committee of Ministers, I intend to listen to all Member States' positions on this issue and to facilitate further progress and avoid deepening divisions in the organization, but rather strengthening and consolidating. Now, if you would allow me just a couple of words from my national capacity, I tend to believe that we do live in a historic moment. Because we clearly see that Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has prompted many processes on European continent, such as European enlargement, which has been started this week with intergovernmental conferences with Moldova and Ukraine. We see similar processes being encouraged also in Western Balkan region. So I believe that this is a clear historic momentum to look into the possibilities of the region. How can we better help the countries of the region to pursue their European goals, be it within the Council of Europe, be it within the European Union. Therefore, if we all take this historic opportunity as our obligation, I think we can achieve progress in this, and we will strive to do what we can in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. On behalf of the European People's Party, Madame Ingrid Skau. Ingrid. Ingrid, we cannot listen to you. Have you put your card, your buds in? I just want to remind you that we all have, when we ask for the floor, to have our buds in the computer. Okay, now we can hear you. Thank you.
It has been in my badge is all right all the time. Yes, and thank you, President. The Foreign Minister Landsbergis, when the Standing Committee met in Vilnius 1 month ago, we discussed the importance of political visibility and relevance of the Council of Europe. It is important that the foreign ministers are committed to the work in our organization. They should meet more often. An important matter on the table of the Committee of Ministers is the Kavala case. Turkey has still not complied with the judgment from our court. What is the Committee of Ministers doing in order for Mr. Kavala to be released? Thank you, Mr. President.
Minister Landsbergis, would you like to respond?
Okay, now it's working. Well, thank you for the question. Executing final judgments of the European Court of Human Rights is not a choice. It is an international legal obligation, accepted voluntarily by the member states. In this, I appreciate the efforts undertaken by the Council of Europe under Liechtenstein's presidency and Turkey to search for a satisfactory resolution to the Kavala case, employing all means available within Turkish legal systems to ensure the execution of this judgment. The Committee of Ministers noted with interest the confirmation of a forthcoming follow-up high-level technical meeting with the Secretariat, which is likely to be scheduled for autumn 2024. The Committee considers that intensifying this result-oriented dialogue is a vital element in resolving the matter, and will continue to follow all developments at its regular and at human rights meetings. All efforts should continue until full implementation of the final decision of the Court.
Thank you. On behalf of ALDE Group, Larissa Bilozir.
President Landsbergis, in my opinion, you are one of the few European leaders that frankly articulates and foresees all the threats of Russian aggression for the future of whole Europe. You stated once that fear of Russia is hindering sufficient Western support for Ukraine. What must be done, in your opinion, and which measures should be taken to overcome these fears? And another question, just on behalf of the ALDE Group, I would like to reiterate again on the need for the fast track for Kosovo admission to the Council of Europe to fulfill the Assembly's decision. Thank you.
Minister Landsbergis, would you like to respond?
Yes. Answering the first question, I do believe, but I will answer this in my national capacity. I do believe that fear is at the core of the way that we make decisions when it comes to supporting Ukraine. And it has been Lithuanian foreign policy objective to dispel the fears, to talk about them from our national experience, from our historic experience that we've had with Russia, as so many other countries in the region. If it were this fear, Lithuanian representative would not be sitting here today talking to the Assembly. It is still likely that with fear, we would still be an occupied country within the Soviet Union. But the bravery of men and women in the 1990s that took a decision to break free, to declare independence, to walk out, and not just in Lithuania, but in the whole region, has led us to freedom, has led us to European Union, to NATO, becoming members of Council of Europe, and being able to assist those who are under attack today. So using this example is how we framed the argument. Since 2014, since 2008, when the war started against Georgia, 2014 against Ukraine. The fear should not bind us. The fear should not restrict us. The ideals of freedom and democracy and human dignity should guide our assistance to Ukraine.
Thank you, Minister. On behalf of the United European Left, Mr. Paul Gavan. Paul, just press it once. You don't need to press it many times, just once.
Yeah, just wait. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I want to ask a question in relation to the contrast between the treatment, the clear condemnation of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and the abject silence of the Committee of Ministers about the ongoing genocide in Gaza. We're now 9 months into this slaughter of the Palestinian people. I cannot find one word of condemnation anywhere from the Committee of Ministers. How do you explain this disgraceful stance of double standards when it comes to protection of human rights?
Minister Landsbergis, would you like to respond?
Thank you for the question. Although the Middle East does not fall within the geographical area covered by our organization, the Committee of Ministers, like your Assembly, is painfully aware of the suffering on the ground. The Committee of Ministers is also very much concerned about the impact of the conflict on European societies. We deplored the alarming upsurge in anti-Semitic incidents in Europe since October 7th, as well as manifestations of hatred and intolerance, including xenophobia and Islamophobia. We must remain extremely vigilant on these issues and not allow hatred and racism to grow in our societies. On a national capacity, let me add that Lithuania remains deeply concerned about the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza and its disproportionate effect on civilians. At the same time, we underline the need to respond to terrorism, stressing the importance of upholding international humanitarian law and protecting civilians.
Thank you, Minister. On behalf of European Conservatives, Oleksiy Goncharenko. Mr. Goncharenko, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, thank you very much for your presentation, but my question for you is definitely about Russian aggression against not just Ukraine but the whole Europe, and the question is about Russian hybrid style of aggression. We see how Russia is not just having a military aggression against Ukraine but also making sabotage attacks, terrorist attacks, and also using legal mechanisms. For example, last week I was sentenced by Russian court for 10 years for something, and definitely I'm the first but not the last. So how the Committee of Ministers sees the counteraction against Russian aggression in this hybrid way in order to not let them use such legal instruments to attack Europe and Europeans? Thank you.
Minister Bandsbergis, would you like to respond?
Thank you for the question. Again, I will answer in my national capacity. It is clear that we are facing a new type of threat that concerns not just Ukraine, but also the countries of Europe. We still call it hybrid, but in many cases I would definitely use a different word. I would use the word terrorist activity. If a country hires a person to burn down a building in another country, I don't think that there's anything hybrid about it. In any other case, if it were not for Russia, if it was a terrorist organization, we would already have called it that way. Therefore, I suggest that we stop using the word hybrid and use it for what it is. And if it's a country behind it, if the country is paying for it from their budget or whatever sources that they have, that means that it's state-sponsored terrorist activity. The only way how to deal with it is to push back, and it relates to the previous question that I answered about the fear. Just by showing strength, we push back on the efforts to undermine our societies. One way how to push back is to stop worrying and give Ukraine all the weapons that it needs to protect itself. Stop worrying and allow Ukraine to attack all the targets that Ukraine deems necessary. That is the best way to show that we're tackling the escalation from Russian side. The next answer could be the further isolation of Russia. And this Assembly and this organization has shown very clearly how to achieve the isolation of Russia. Not all the organizations that we are part of have taken these steps. So I think that there's still a lot that can be done. Apart from diplomatic isolation, there could be also economic isolation. At this time, we're talking about, we've just finished talking about the 14th sanction package in the European Union. We shouldn't be stopping there. We shouldn't be making those packages weaker. We should be sending a very clear signal to Moscow that if they do escalate, there will be a very strong and clear answer to that.
Thank you, Minister Bandsbergis. Now I will give the floor to other speakers and we'll take them in groups of 3. Dear colleagues, please limit your interventions to 30 seconds, and we'll start with Sibel Arslan.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Mr. Landsbergis, for your presentation. I want to know if the Committee of Ministers committed to supporting climate justice in Europe. If so, how? And what measures is the Committee of Ministers taking to promote climate justice in Europe? And if not, why not? Thank you very much.
Abdurrahman Babachan is next.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chairperson and Mr. Foreign Minister. My question will be about the future of the Europe's ideals and how the deep way, especially among within younger generations, will be reflected in this future. Because within the context of protection of human rights, there are strong criticisms against Council of Europe that it does not take any step against some huge human rights violations outside of the European borders. Also considering the structure of the Council of Europe's institution, including consisting of various countries as observer countries like as Israel, but the Council of Europe did not take any step against Israel as an observer status. What do you think about that? Thanks.
Thank you. Olena Komenko is next.
Dear Mr. Landsbergis, thank you for your genuine commitment to the Ukrainian cause, notably to the issue of Ukrainian children. I'm Olena Komenko, a rapporteur on the situation of the children of Ukraine, and my question is the following. Having in mind the activities of the Council of Europe consultation group on the children of Ukraine and the respective Council of Europe focal point that you have mentioned, and recognizing the need for a coordinating approach, how do you envision the further cooperation of the Committee of Ministers and Parliamentary Assembly in terms of the situation of Ukrainian children, both deported by Russia and those residing under temporary protection of the Council of Europe member states? Thank you.
So, Minister Landsbergis, would you like?
So answering the first question about climate, the Reykjavik Declaration committed to making a clean, healthy and sustainable environment for present and future generations a visible priority for our organization. The European Court also made headlines when it found that the Convention encompasses a right to effective protection by the state authorities from the serious adverse effects of climate change. The implementation of this important ruling will be followed by the Committee of Ministers according to usual procedures. Our presidency will support the work of the Council of Europe on the human right to a clean and healthy environment in accordance with the mandate given in Reykjavik. In this connection, on 11th of July in New York, we will organize a side event at the 2024 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. Answering the second question, the Council of Europe is a European organization, having primary responsibilities vis-à-vis its member states in the fields of human rights, rule of law and democracy. That is why Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine remains a key focus of this organization and Lithuanian presidency. Yet that does not mean that we remain untouched by the conflicts outside Europe, including in the Middle East, by their consequences, especially those affecting our core values of human rights and rule of law. The Committee of Ministers is very much concerned about the impact of these conflicts on European societies. And answering the third question, the situation of children in Ukraine has been extensively discussed by the Committee of Ministers. We deplore the killings, injuries, sexual abuse of children by the Russian forces, especially the unlawful transfers of Ukrainian children and their deportation to the Russian Federation and Belarus, their forcible placement under custody or illegal adoption by Russian foster families. A declaration on the situation of children in Ukraine adopted at the Reykjavik summit calls for intensified efforts to guarantee the effective protection of the rights of children of Ukraine. As a follow-up to the declaration, a consultation group on the children of Ukraine has been set up as a multilateral platform to exchange information and to foster discussions about policies affecting Ukrainian children residing in Council of Europe member states. On 5th June, the Committee of Ministers welcomed the Secretary General's decision to appoint a focal point on the situation and return of Ukrainian children. As Presidency, we suggest that Council of Europe become a collective member of the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children. In the national capacity, let me add that Lithuania has provided evidence to the ICC regarding involvement of the Belarus regime, political leadership, as well as its controlled companies in the deportation of Ukrainian children to the territory of Belarus.
Thank you, Minister Bandsbergis. Dear colleagues, I have now the honor to announce the results of the first round of voting for the election of the Secretary General of the Council of Europe. The results are as follows. Number of voters, 241. Blank or invalid ballots, 1. Votes cast, 240. Absolute majority of the votes cast, 121. Obtained. Mr. Alain Berset, 92. Mr. Didier Reinders, 70. Mr. Indrexar, 78. As no candidate has obtained an absolute majority of the votes cast, it will be necessary, under the same conditions, to proceed with a second round of voting for which a relative majority is sufficient this afternoon from 4 to 6 p.m. We're going on now. I will ask for the second group of our colleagues to address questions to Minister Bandsbergis, starting from Katalin Sesber. Katalin, sorry, but it's difficult for me to pronounce the name.
Ça marche, ça marche. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed. The Statute of the Council of Europe clearly defines that the aim of the Council of Europe is to achieve a greater unity between its members. What role do you envisage for your presidency of the Committee of Ministers to fulfill this aim? Thank you.
Thank you, Katalin Seber. Laura Castel is next.
Press, no, they're just thinking. Okay.
It is an exercise for all of us to be patient.
To be patient, that's correct. Thank you, Chair. Okay, thank you. Taking into account the resolution on Pegasus malware approved last October, which urged 5 governments to provide information, investigate all cases, apply sanctions, and provide redress to targeted victims, could you share with us if those member states have complied with the request of this Assembly, given that the 3-month deadline expired last January? Thank you.
And now, Alain Cadec.
President and Minister, Lithuania has made the digital dimension of freedom one of the priority themes of its presidency of the Committee of Ministers. You place particular emphasis on the new Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence, human rights, democracy and the rule of law, and hope that it will be open for signature at the informal conference of justice ministers that you are organising in Vilnius on the 4th and 5th of September. What do you see as the priority issues in terms of digital freedom? How do you intend to promote this framework agreement during your presidency? Thank you.
Minister Bandsbergis, would you like to respond?
Thank you for the questions. So answering the first question, indeed, as the statute defines, our aim should be to achieving a greater unity through common actions. However, greater unity should not be an aim in itself, but rather be forged around our common values. If you look at our presidency priorities, you will find a number of specific areas of action, such as supporting for Ukraine, defending itself against Russia's war of aggression, protection of human rights in conflict areas, just to name a few. In all these and in many other issues on the agenda, Lithuanian presidency will perform its duties in the spirit of unity, but also making sure that such unity leads to action. Finally, speaking about unity, it would not be possible without the emphasis on the interinstitutional dialogue. First and foremost with your Assembly, as another statutory body of the organization. Answering the second question, the use of such intrusive spyware tools risks serious violations of the right to private and family life protected by Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Their use needs to be supervised with great care. The Committee of Ministers is currently considering your question with regard to your recommendation on Pegasus and similar spyware and secret state surveillance, which calls for a new legal instrument in this field. And answering the third question, digital dimension is indeed an important priority of the Lithuanian presidency. We are placing an emphasis on freedom of expression, on safety of journalists, artificial intelligence and human rights, as well as fight against disinformation, hate speech, and distortion of history. Adoption of the Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights, following the overwhelmingly positive opinion of your Assembly, is a key achievement in this field. This fulfilled one of the main commitments made at the Reykjavik summit. Also last week, Lithuania hosted the European Dialogue on Internet Governance and the European AI Forum. In September, Lithuania is ready to serve as host to the opening for signature of the Framework Convention on AI. There is currently a discussion within the EU on whether this convention falls under the mixed competency of the EU and its member states. We encourage an expeditious conclusion of this discussion.
Thank you, Minister. Peter Frick is next.
Besten Dank. Sehr gerne würde ich die Frage auf Deutsch stellen.
Thank you very much. The question in German. On behalf of the Liechtenstein delegation, I would like to thank Mr. Landsbergis, His Excellency, the Minister, for his presentation. Now, what has been mentioned has been a Council of Information point in Vilnius and setting this up. This is something that was discussed during the Council of Ministers meeting. I would like to ask for further information with regard to that. I think indeed it would be something extremely useful.
It's great to see you in the chamber. The chamber remember our revolutions in the 90s, successful joining for all Middle Europe, and our try to warn our Western neighbors that the war is coming. Now we are leading. Lithuania is under chairmanship. So tell us, please, having in Vilnius the Belarusian leadership of Belarusian Democrats, Russian leadership, even making steps towards Taiwan. Tell us how will be important to extend our activities in support of democracies inside of non-democratic regimes, and how to avoid in our countries, Western countries, double standards for those firms who are avoiding circumvening sanctions. That was our meeting about that in Vilnius, and thank you for your brilliant speech in Vilnius and the speech now. Thank you.
Anna Citlidze is next.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to you, Mr. Minister, for your support to the Georgian people in its way of European integration. My question is about the upcoming elections, parliamentary elections. On October 26, we all understand that the opening EU accession negotiation will, depending how free, transparency, and fair the parliamentary election will be. But situation in Georgia, what we have is a violence attack of opposition figures, civil activists, and journalists, and how the Council of Europe actively contributing to ensuring these elections will be genuinely free and fair. Thank you.
Minister Landsbergis, would you like to respond?
Thank you for the questions. Answering the first one, as you may know, Lithuania and Vilnius in particular has become a hub where representatives of opposition from Russia and Belarus are able to find refuge against persecution and continue their activities. Opening the information point for Belarusian people in Vilnius would rather contribute to the promotion of European values, human rights, democracy, and rule of law among Belarusian democratic civil society. Hopefully, the information point will soon be included in the program of activities of the Council of Europe. The issue will be examined later this week in a meeting of the contact group, which gathers representatives of the Council of Europe and of the Belarusian democratic forces and civil society. Second question regarding the discussion on harmonized sharing of information regarding cases of Russia and Belarus sanction circumvention. It is among our presidency's priorities. Here, I wanted to appreciate the efforts by the head of Lithuanian delegation, Mr. Emanuelis Zingeris, in promoting discussion on information sharing and keeping this question high on the Assembly's agenda. And on last point, if you would allow me, I would also choose just a couple of words on in the national capacity. I think that there's a particular role that our institution can play before the election, and it has to deal with election observation and monitoring. It is very unfortunate that we might find there have been difficulties during the previous elections in Georgia, but we might find ourselves in a very different situation. Starting from the 1st of September, many of the non-governmental organizations that have been able to observe election and to provide answers to European countries, to those who are interested, to Georgian citizens, as to how the elections were organized, will be no longer able to do so because of the new law. Therefore, it is imperative that the organizations that can do that would do that instead of those organizations who are unable to do so. To add to that, as politicians, we should be sending a very clear signal to Georgian people that the election that they will be participating in might, the vote that they are casting is also the vote possibly for the direction of the country. And we cannot avoid saying this, because people have to know how we see the current situation that Georgian government decided to put their country in. We have to be transparent about this.
Thank you, Minister. Sonia Khazarian is next.
Mr. Minister, in a decision adopted during the ministerial meeting on May 17, the Committee of Ministers expressed its full support for the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, based on the principles of mutual recognition of territorial integrity, respect of sovereignty, the inviolability of borders and non-use of force, and welcome the process of border delimitation based on Almaty Declaration. My question is, what will the Lithuanian presidency do concerning this decision, as well as what will will be done to support normalization process between two countries? Thank you.
Enis Kervan is next. Enis, have you inserted your badge?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, dear President. Dear Minister, first of all, I want to thank you for your all contribution and support for Kosovo. Acknowledging the fact that PACE, with a strong majority of 82% of votes in favor, has recommended the Committee of Ministers to invite Kosovo to become a full member. When does the Committee of Ministers plan to implement this recommendation? Unfortunately, the recommendation of PACE was not addressed in the last ministerial. Will there be extraordinary ministerial calls this year to address this topic? You know, we are engaging in Brussels within the dialogue process, but that is a separate issue which is not exclusively in the hands of Kosovo. Thank you.
Robert Troy.
Can I ask the Minister, does the Council of Ministers discuss the appalling situation in Gaza, and if so, how frequently? And what role do you believe the Council of Ministers have to ensuring the appalling situation and the appalling treatment of innocent Palestinian civilians ends?
Minister Landsbergis, would you like to respond?
Well, thank you so much for the questions. Answering the first one, regarding the relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the Committee of Ministers indeed expressed its full support to the peace process. I hope that the ongoing discussions will soon lead to an agreement that will allow the region to regain the stability it needs. Political will at the highest level to normalize relations is key to reach a peace agreement in full respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. When joining the organization back in 2001, both countries agreed to settle their conflict by peaceful means. In this context, a set of confidence-building measures proposed by the Council of Europe remain available to both countries to foster dialogue and reconciliation. Answering the second question, I've covered during my answer and my initial speech. Just want to reconfirm that we will do our best in order to seek progress in this question, taking into account all the sensitivities. And answering the last question, again, I've covered during my previous answer, but to be specific about this, the Council of Ministers did not discuss the question specifically at this stage because it falls out of the mandate of the Council of Ministers. Thank you.
We must now conclude the questions to Mr. Landsbergis. On behalf of the Assembly, I thank him most warmly for his answers this afternoon. Dear colleagues, the Assembly will hold its next public sitting this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. with the agenda approved on Monday. The sitting is adjourned.